Next up, let's introduce some state. We're using hooks here, so I'm not going to cover class components, but we're going to use the useState component in our app. So instead of having this hard-coded array of items, I'm actually going to create an empty array at the beginning, although it doesn't have to start empty, but some array that we'll get back from useState, and then useState gives us a function we can use to update that piece of state. So instead of just importing React, I'm also going to get useState. And then, of course, this is TypeScript, and we know that we can look at the type definition for useState. We need to provide an initial state, right? That's an important piece. And then we're going to get back an array. Technically, it's a TypeScript tuple, but it's a JavaScript array that has two things. It has our initial state of type S, and then it's going to have our function that we can use to change that state, to set the state. So this will be very confusing if you've never seen useState in React hooks. Again, I would definitely go learn that before trying to learn it right now. But if you are familiar with useState, you know that it returns two things in an array. So it returns one thing, an array, but it has two items in a very particular order. So why don't we call useState and have it start off with an empty array, and that's going to return to us two things in an array, and we'll destructure that. We'll go with items and then set items, and then I'll comment out my items here. So set items is going to be a function. It's just complaining that we're not using it, but that's what we would call to then update items, right? That first thing that we get back from useState. Now, if we look at what items is, we've got a bit of a problem. Items right here, its type is set to never, an array of never. Basically, we set it to the literal type of an empty array, but that's not what we want. We want it to be an array that maybe starts empty, but should be able to hold our items, right? Objects that have ID, product, quantity. And if we look at the useState type definition again, it is a generic, as we can see here, and we can give it a type that says, here is the type of this piece of state. So I could go into my app again, and the type is basically going to be an array of these items. So I can just copy and paste this item interface for now. We're not going to duplicate it, but just to get it working, I'll do this. And then I can say, all right, useState, I want you to actually be of type item array. So that tells it now that this, maybe we're starting as an empty array as the value, but the type itself of items is an array of item types. So useState, that's a big difference, right, between regular JavaScript useState versus TypeScript. We provided a type, it's a generic, and then we provided the starting value. It returns to us the same thing as always, an array that has the piece of state, in this case, an array of items that's empty, but it's type items in TypeScript, and then a function we can call to update the state. Okay, so we can leave this duplicated, but I am going to move that into a file at the end of this video. Now, the next thing we should do is just make sure it works, right? We have an empty shopping list for now, which is to be expected. We're not actually updating the state at any point, but now we have this empty array that is being passed through, and everyone's happy because this shopping list component is expecting an array of type items. It's okay if it's empty, but it should be of type item. Okay, so I think we'll stop here. In the next video, we'll go ahead and add a form in and deal with events and all that fun stuff. The last thing I'll do is just move this into a separate file. Now, in a real application, there's many ways of structuring this. You could have, inside of your components directory, you could have a folder for each component, like shopping list. And then in there, you can have the index.tsx file, which could be the component itself, and then you could have a model.tsx or TS file. There's different ways of doing this, but what I'm going to do is just make a models directory. And it's going to be very sparse. It's basically just going, oh, I made a file, didn't I? Let's try that again. Let's make a models folder, and then in there, I'll make a file called, what is this? Item.ts. And then in here, I'll export default my interface called item. And then in this app.tsx where I'm using item, I'm going to import that type. So I'll do import item from, and then dot slash, it's actually, what is it, models slash item. and then do the same thing in my shopping list. I'm going to get rid of this interface definition and use the one from my models. Although here I need to use 2 dots because I need to go back 1 folder from components, go up, and then into models. And everything should still work just fine. Now we're reusing that one interface. Okay.